All right, this is lesson 5, completing the square. Our essential question is, how can you solve a quadratic equation by completing the square? Our table of contents. Use square roots to solve quadratic equations. So what are the solution or solutions of 25 equals x squared plus 14x plus 49? So I'm looking at the right side of my equation and I realize that x squared plus 14x plus 49 is a perfect square trinomial. And what that means is I can easily factor it, and I can factor it into the product of two squares. So x plus 7 times x plus 7 would give me that x squared plus 14x plus 49, okay? So using that, I can then take the square root of both sides, because in order to undo a square, I have to use the square root. That would give me plus or minus 5 on the left side of the equation, and the absolute value of x plus 7 on the right side of my equation. Okay. Remember, when I'm squaring something, it's always going to be positive. I then use the definition of square roots and absolute values to solve this. So when I have absolute values, I have 5 equals x plus 7, or negative 5 equals x plus 7. So x would equal 2, or x would equal negative 12. Understand the process of completing the square. Now, unfortunately, not every trinomial is going to be a perfect square trinomial. They're not going to be all necessarily easy to factor, okay? So I want to know how I can rewrite the expression x squared plus bx in the form x plus p squared. So we can use what is called completing the square. So again, not every quadratic expression is a perfect square trinomial. Completing the square is the process of finding the constant to add to x squared plus bx to create a perfect square trinomial. So we start with x squared plus bx. X squared into 2. X times x. We also can do the same thing with the bx. We divide both bx by 2. So now we've got the split, so we can create that square. Now what we're missing is that little section, which is b over 2 squared. Solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. So how can you solve 0 equals x squared plus 4x plus 8 by completing the square? So the first thing I want to do is determine my a, my b, and my c. Okay, so again, my a is 1 in this case, my b is 4, and my c is 8. Then I want to substitute the value of b equals 4 into that b over 2 divided, or to the squared. So b over 2, so 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. 2 squared is 4. Okay. These are the two numbers that we're going to be using when we create our binomial, as well as when we're completing the square. So we want this 4 for completing the square, and we want the 2 when we're going to write our binomial. So I subtract 8 from both sides because I want it as x squared plus bx equals whatever my value is. So I moved 8 to the other side. I'm going to add b divided by 2 squared to both sides of my equation. So that 4 divided by 2, which is 2 squared, to both sides of my equation. So that's 4. So I added 4 to both sides. Okay. Then I rewrite my trinomial as a binomial. Okay. As a perfect square binomial. So x plus 2 squared equals negative 4. Okay, and I've just combined negative 8 plus 4 on this side. That plus 2 came from that b divided by 2. I then take the square root of both sides. Notice that this is a negative 4 over here, which means we're going to get an imaginary number when we simplify this. Okay, so square root of x plus 2 squared equals the square root of negative 4. Okay, which gives me x plus 2 on my left side of my equation, plus or minus 2i. Square root of 4 is 2. The square root of -1 is I. Okay, then I subtract 2 from both sides, so I get x equals -2 plus or minus 2i. Complete the square to solve a real-world problem. The relationships between the time since a ball was kicked and its height can be modeled by the equation h equals 32t minus 16t squared plus 4, where h is the height of the ball after t seconds. I want to complete the square to find how long it will take the ball to reach a height of 20 feet. Okay. So to do this, again, I want to determine my A, my B, and my C. So my A in this case is -16, my B is 32, and my C is 4. I also rewrote my equation to make my life a little bit easier. I moved the t squared to the front of that equation. I can move them into any order that I want. It doesn't affect the outcome. Okay. I then substitute the value of 20 because I want a height of 20 feet in for h, and I subtract 4 from the right side of my equation. So 20 minus 4 equals 16. So I have 16 equals -16t squared plus 32t. I can factor out a -16 from the right side of my equation. And you really want to do this because when you're completing the square, you want that x squared or that t squared or whatever value you're squaring to have a 1 in front of it. It'll make your life easier when you're completing the square. So I factored out a -16. So -16 came out on with the t squared, and it was +32. So it became -2. Now I need to figure out my b divided by 2 squared. So I substitute my value of b, which is -2. -2 divided by 2 is -1. Then -1 squared is 1. Okay, I add that value to both sides. Don't forget, because you factored out a -16, you have to multiply that -16 by the left side of your equation too. So the -16 that I factored out times my value of b divided by 2 squared. Okay, so in this case, it's -16 times 1, which gives me 16 minus 16. That's going to give me 0. I'm going to rewrite my right side of my equation using my perfect square trinomial that I created. So I have -16 times t minus 1 squared. Again, that -1 came from that b divided by 2. Okay. I then simplify my equation. I divide both sides by -16. And then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of 0 is 0. The square root of t minus 1 squared is plus or minus t minus 1. Okay, and I can set each of them equal to 0. It's going to give me the exact same answer. So I would have t minus 1 equals 0 and -t plus 1 equals 0. They're both going to give me t equals 1. So the ball will reach 20 feet after 1 second of being kicked. Write a quadratic equation in vertex form. So we've talked a little bit about vertex form, standard form, and factored form. So now we're going to utilize what we remember from the first 3 lessons of this unit to be able to write a quadratic equation in vertex form, but we're also going to use completing the square. So example, a dolphin jumps out of the water and the equation that follows its path is -4x squared plus 16x minus 15. Write the equation in vertex form and determine the maximum or minimum of the dolphin's height. So again, my first step is to determine my A, my B, and my C. Okay, that information is going to help me complete the square. So my A is -4, my B is 16, and my C is -15. I add C to both sides. Remember, I still have that Y plus or Y minus, whatever the case may be, since that's my equation. That plus 15 goes the other side, and I can factor out a -4 from the right side of my equation. So -4 times x squared minus 4x. Then I can determine my b divided by 2 squared. So b in this case was -4. -4 divided by 2 is -2. -2 squared is +4. I add that value to both sides of my equation, remembering that I factored out a -4, so I have to multiply the left side of my equation by a -4 as well. So I have y plus 15 plus -4 times 4 equals -4 times x squared minus 4x plus 4. That -4 times 4 becomes -16, so I'm going to simplify. Okay. So I get y minus 1 equals -4 times x minus 2 squared. Okay. This is in vertex, almost in vertex form. I have my a out front. I've got my -2, my h value. Now I just need to move this 1 to the other side. So I add 1 to both sides. This is my vertex equation. Okay. I also know that the dolphin is jumping out of the water, which means my quadratic is an upside down quadratic with this negative out in front. I can also recognize that. That means that I'm going to have a maximum value. In this case, I'm going to have a maximum value at x equals 2 and y is going to be 1 because that's my vertex. So summary. So in terms of geometric thinking, I've got that x squared plus bx. I'm splitting that bx in half. Okay, so I'm trying to create the square because right now it's a rectangle. So I move the bx to the side and to the bottom, and then I'm missing that little red piece. So that's the square that I'm missing. That's what I'm adding to the equation. So I remember that I have to add that to both sides of my equation to make sure I'm keeping that balance. Okay. So if I wanted to solve something like x squared plus 8x equals 9, okay, I would substitute, I would add 16 both sides because 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I'm adding 16 to both sides. Okay. And then I would rewrite by using b divided by 2, which is 8 divided by 2. So I'm creating that trinomial to a binomial. So x plus 4 squared equals 25. Take the square root of both sides. Okay, so I get x plus 4 equals positive or -5. And then I'm going to simplify by subtracting 4 from both sides. Okay, so I would get x equals 5 minus 4 or x equals -5 minus 4, which is going to give me 1 or -9. This is also going to show, these are also my zeros of my function. So just like we did in previous lessons, these are zeros of your function. So the zeros of my function, x squared plus 8x equals 9, are going to be 1 and -9. Those are the places that they're going to cross the x-axis. And that is the end of lesson 5.